Welcome back. This is the third video on making Wordle, and today we're going to talk about something exciting, JavaScript programming. So far we have worked on the Wordle using HTML and CSS, and it is a page that you can view, but it is something that you cannot change or interact with, right? If you click on it or you type on your keyboard, there's no response from the page. It's not interactive. So in order to make it interactive and be able to react during the game, we have to introduce JavaScript programming, which is the standard programming language for major browsers today. So we are going to introduce some basic JavaScript concepts briefly and then put those in action. Now, before we do that, there is one tool on the browser that I would like to introduce, and with two basic components that is going to be very useful for HTML, CSS, but also later for JavaScript as well. So if you are using the Chrome browser, you can go to the right corner, top right corner, go to which is the menu. You see the three dots, and then go to more tools, and then developer tool. You also see the shortcuts. Okay, so next time if you want to show it, you can just use your shortcut, turn on the developer tools. Now in Safari, in Firefox, in Edge, it also provides such tools. They may be under different names slightly. Okay, but anyway, turn on the developer tools. You may see it either at the bottom or on the side of your browser screen. And today, there are lots of great tools in the developer tools. But today we're going to just briefly talk about two. One is called the elements, and the other is the console. So let's focus on the elements. The elements tab allows you to take a look at the existing elements in the current HTML page. So sometimes when you make the changes in your HTML and you don't see the actual change reflected on the browser, you may want to check the elements. But an very important part of the element is not just HTML, but is that when you select a particular element, so for example, I select this particular game board, it also shows me the corresponding rendering of that element on the browser. Okay, or you can go to this small icon here, and once you click on it, you can actually pick and choose an element on the screen, and it's actually going to show you where this element is. So for example, if I click on this specific element with letter E, it actually highlights the div element for me. So this shows me the corresponding rendering and the HTML code. Okay, so this is a very good tool for debugging. And then once you select an element, you can also check out the matching CSS, right? So you see this element is row 1, column 3, and the class includes column and match. And so down here at the bottom frame, you will see that it shows the dot match class selector and the dot column, also another class selector that have been applied to this particular element. And because you see in dot match, the background color is orange, and that's why this element is using the orange color. So this is a very good tool for you to take a look at HTML and CSS live and be able to see if you are encountering issues or even if you just want to change things. For example, if I remove match, okay, from this HTML, the enter, you see this element immediately changes its background color because it no longer matches the match class, right? Now, if I put this match class back, we can reintroduce the class back to the element where this background color will be applied again. Okay, so this is a very useful tool for HTML and CSS. But later you will also see it's a very important tool for JavaScript as well, because when you use JavaScript, you can actually use JavaScript to dynamically change HTML and CSS. And if this is not in your original HTML CSS code and you want to check whether the JavaScript actually has done the job to modify HTML and CSS, you can actually check it here in the elements. Okay, so that is one note. The second tab I would like to introduce here is the console. Okay, and this console is primarily for JavaScript. Okay, and so there's nothing in the console yet. But later, when we start to program in JavaScript, we can actually output something into the console just for us to keep track of things. So console is a very kind of a basic tool for you to trace data information along the way. Okay, so just two basic pieces of information, and as part of the web developer tools. So, and normally when you are developing a website, web page, or application, you normally want to keep this web developer tools open so that you can keep track of things. Okay, so with that, we can get to JavaScript. And I will leave this panel open, okay, the web developer tools open while we talk about JavaScript. Okay, so we talk about this current page being in HTML, CSS, and only viewable, right? You cannot interact with it. So JavaScript can help you interact, improve the interactivity. And one way to do it is that JavaScript is a programming language that is event-driven. So there is a concept of event. What is an event? Event is something that can be triggered or something that happens between the computer or the browser and the user. So for example, if you click something, right, clicks the button, and that perhaps should, execute the code to save or post your data, right? So a click is an event. Or if the clock reaches a particular time and you want to do something, maybe you want to do something repeatedly every 5 minutes or so. So timer is also an event. There's another event that is related to the status of the page. So for example, sometimes it takes some time to load a page, and even though it may be very fast, still it may take a few milliseconds, to load a page. So sometimes you want to do something only after the entire page has been completely loaded. So there is a onload event of the page, and we are going to use that today because we want to, for example, show the keyboard once the entire page has been loaded, and we are going to use JavaScript to automatically generate the keyboard with keys. Okay, so event is an important concept in JavaScript. In JavaScript, of course, as other programming languages, an important concept is variable. Okay, and we are going to use the variables throughout our programming. A variable is essentially just a token that is a reference to a memory location on the computer for you to store something, either to store a number or to store a message such as a string, right? Or perhaps even an object, a complex object with many different things in it. Okay, so just remember that a variable is a location that allows you to store things in there. Okay, and then lastly, a function. A function is something that you can create in JavaScript as a block for lots of things. Okay, because normally when you create code in JavaScript, it is more than just one line of code, but can be many different lines, and you can organize all these lines of code in one function. And then later, once you create the function, you can use it again and again and again. So you can reuse the function multiple times, and that helps you better organize your code and make it more efficient. Okay, so these are some basic concepts, and again, maybe this is kind of confusing for those of you who are new to programming, but we'll get there. Okay, once we put all these in action. So I think with that, we shall go ahead to do some JavaScript coding, but I would like to outline what we are going to actually do today. So today we're going to create the keyboard, right? As you see, we have a template, so to speak, for the words, right? And different colors and backgrounds. So it's in there for the game board. And then, but in the Wordle, we should also have a keyboard with keys. And in HTML, we already have a keyboard div. There's just nothing in there yet. So hopefully we'll be able to insert some keys in there, right? So let me just give you a quick example. I don't want to make it too complex today because this is the first really video in this series to talk about JavaScript. So I want to make this rather brief. So let's try something in HTML first and then see how we can replicate that in JavaScript. Okay, and that will be our task today. Okay, so let's say in this keyboard area we want to insert perhaps another div, right? And in this div I want to put in between the open and close, I want to put a key for A, right? For letter A. So if I do that and then I save it, right? And then I go to the page on the browser, I can refresh. You can see A is shown there, right? And if I add another one, I can, I can add another div for B and so forth. Okay, you get the idea? So I can append one div after another to create many keys for the keyboard. So how can we do that in JavaScript? And that is the task for today. Okay, so with that, before so to create that in JavaScript, we first of all need to create a JavaScript file. Okay, so let's go to our project outline Explorer, and I'm going to under the same folder create a new file. I'm going to call it index.js. Okay, for now index.js is empty, and ultimately we're going to put code in there, but let's go back to the HTML. In order for this HTML to execute code in the JavaScript in the index.js, we need to include it. Okay, so the way to do it is you can create a script src tag and point the src for source. Okay, so the source code is in the index.js. Okay, so we put the source in index.js, and that's it. Okay, whatever code that we put in the index.js will be loaded into this current HTML. And for now, because we have no code in HTML, if we refresh the current page, we are not seeing any changes. But now we are going to make it. Okay, so we know that JavaScript can have functions. Okay, so in index.js, we're going to create a function to render a key. Okay, so for now, let's just make it very simple. Okay, so excuse me. So the function keyword here indicate that this is a function, and then this render key is the function name that I created. Okay, followed by a pair of parentheses. Okay, for now in the parentheses there's nothing because we do not accept parameters or arguments. In the future, we can create a function to accept data or accept arguments. But for now, let's keep it simple. So render key in there. And in this render key, what we are going to do ultimately is to perhaps render another key such as C. Right? We have A, B in there. Let's see if we can do that in JavaScript to render a key such as C. If we can do C, we can do D, and so forth, right? So that's the purpose. But for now, remember I told you that Java in JavaScript, console is a basic tool for you to trace information. Okay, so instead of doing the actual work, what I would like to do is add a piece of code for console.log. Console.log is going to kind of produce some logging information or to output some basic information. And here I'm going to just say hello world. Okay, and this will be a message. If we see, we know our program works, right? So console log and then parentheses quote unquote hello world. Okay, so quote unquote include a string, and then the console.log is basically calling the console object, which is the reference to the console that I show on the right hand side. And .log is a function as part of the object, okay, to output a piece of information. And in this case, it is to output hello world. And then this semicolon, okay, is also always required, or I would highly recommend at the end of each and every single JavaScript statement. Okay, so this completes your JavaScript statement to output the piece of information. Okay, so let's leave it there for now. But still, if you have this function and save it and refresh the page, you don't see anything, right? Even on the console, there's nothing on the console. So what happened? I talked about the fact that JavaScript is event driven. Okay, so code is executed by events, and so in order for this piece of code to be executed or run, we need to attach it to an event. So once that event happens, that code will be triggered. Okay, so right now I would like to render this new key, okay, or at least execute this function render key here, okay, when the page is loaded. Okay, so every time I reload the page, this should be executed. So because we're talking about an event associated with the page, okay, the page is essentially the body, okay, the body section, okay. so which is the web document here, okay, and it's part of this onload event. We can add this onload equal to in the body section, okay, and whatever we put in here in the quote-unquote after onload equal to will be executed, okay, when the page is loaded. So we are going to execute the renderKey function. You can put a semicolon, that's okay. Okay, so this is going to execute the renderKey from the index.js. Okay, again, renderKey, okay, in index.js. So once we put this, basically register this function to the onload event, and now we come back to the browser and refresh it, and you are going to see hello world on the console. Okay, so this is the output, but let's go a step further. So for now we know that this is executed. If you don't see anything, okay, you don't see hello world, or you see any error message, you may want to fix it. So sometimes the first time you do it, maybe you have a typo, okay, and then when you refresh and try to execute, it says, oh, there is no such thing as console, okay, console is not defined, and so it tells you what the problem is, where the code is. It says index and then number 2, right, or index.js 2, which means it's line 2, second line. Okay, and we come here and fix the problem. We know it should be console. Okay, fix it, save it, and refresh, and it should work here. Okay, so if everything is connected properly, this should work, and we can proceed to make our final changes. Okay, so what we actually would like to do is to add a C, letter C in a div. Okay, so just like A and B here, we want to add a div with letter C. Okay, so what you can do here is simply use document. Document is the object that is a reference to the current web page, current web document. And there is lots of different functions built in as part of the JavaScript library that you can use to do something. But one such function is to create element. Okay, and when you create element, you provide the tag name. Okay, in this case, we want to create a div, right? And so document.create element. Just pay attention to the capitalization. The E is capital, so you have to use capital, otherwise there will be a problem. So document.create element will create an element, and then we provide the parameter, which is div. This is going to create a div element. But once we create an element, we need to save it somewhere. Okay, so we need to create a variable. In JavaScript, we can use var to create a variable, and you can call this any variable anything, but normally just use letters. Okay, and you can also have underscore. So perhaps you can call it my div, right? That's good for now. Okay, so my underscore div. Don't use space in between. Okay, but my underscore div will just be fine. Okay, now let me emphasize what happens here. So document.create element will create a new element, and then var my div will create a new variable. Okay, now this equal to is an assignment operator. which is going to take whatever on the right hand side, take it from the right hand side and assign that thing, okay, whatever that is, to the variable on the left hand side. So we create a new element and assign the element to my div. So now this my div stores the new element, the new div element that you have created. Okay, so this currently this my div is a new div element. Now we want to simulate what happened here in the keyboard, right, for key A and B. So for both divs, we want to put a ladder in between the opening and the closing, right? A between open div and close div, B between open div and close div. Now we want to put a C, right, between the open div and the closed div. And this space here between the open and close is called referred to as the inner HTML or inner text. Okay, so if we want to insert C in there in JavaScript, just put inner HTML equal to C. Okay, so we create a div and put a C in the div. But where does this div go? This div should go inside this another div, which is the keyboard, right? It should become a child inside the keyboard, the div with ID keyboard, right? So we first need to select this particular div with ID keyboard and then append the new C div as a new child element to the keyboard. Okay, so what we are going to do is that I want to use the keyboard underscore div to reference the keyboard div. But how can we reference it? We can use document dot get element by ID and then keyboard, okay, or whatever ID the element we want has. Okay, so this div has ID equal to keyboard, capital K and capital B. So what we have here, we use document.getElement by ID, and we use the same ID so that we can reference exactly the same element, keyboard div. Okay, and then we save the reference to keyboard underscore div as a new variable. Okay, so right now this keyboard div is a reference to the keyboard element, and we can use it as another object and then basically use dot append child and append my div as a child to that keyboard element. Okay, so so this is the process. Let's give it a try. And as you can tell, okay, once we re-execute, refresh the page, you will see a letter C in here. Okay, now we know the code is executed. Okay, but just in case it doesn't, where do we check? Okay, first of all, you can check whether you have anything on the console, whether you have errors. Okay, and then the second place, if you cannot find any clue, is also you can go back to the elements and then take a look at the elements to see whether there are changes. Okay, in this case, under the div ID equal to keyboard, there is in addition to A and B, there's also a C div here, which is different from our original HTML source code. Okay, so this HTML source remains, a keyboard with only A and B divs, but because of our JavaScript, an additional C is included as well. And okay, one more note, and I'm going to review the program here. So in JavaScript, you can not only include code, but can also include something like comments that are not really code, but notes for the reader and for people. Okay, and comments are not executed. It's more for you to understand the code, and for perhaps when you pass on this code to others, for other people to read the code as well. Okay, so here I would like to introduce one way to include comments. You can simply put 2 slashes here to start a comment, and you can comment about the next line or the next new few lines of code here, such as, okay, this is to trace information in the program. Okay, and then we can discuss the next one, which is to create a new element, right? A div element, and store it to my div as a variable. Okay, and the next line here is simply to put a C in that div. Okay, I hope this makes sense so far. Okay, so we have the C div. Now we need to put the C div in the keyboard element. So first thing is to reference the ID equal to keyboard div. Okay, and save the reference to variable keyboard div. Okay, so keyboard div now is a reference to the div with ID equal to keyboard, and now we can add the C div to the keyboard div, right? So now we append the div with C, right, as a child to the keyboard div. Okay, something like that. So I'm typing all these comments. It's kind of too much comments actually, but just for you to understand the steps here. Okay, before we go, let's add some CSS code to increase the size of the letters to make them also resemble keys on the keyboard, right? So we need to use some CSS, and we are going to integrate the CSS both in the HTML and the JavaScript, so that the ABC, the 3 letters that we have created here, will be, will have some styles. So let's go to CSS first. Suppose we are going to use the car selector .key to change the styles of the keys, the letters here. And again, we're going to use the flex design. So display flex direction should be and then justify content center, line items center, and then we are going to increase the font size. Okay, instead of using PT, let's use all relative measurement. So we are going to use pixels here. Maybe we can try 35 px and change the background color to perhaps something lighter. We can continue to use gray or any color that you will prefer. Okay, for now I'm using color names, but feel free to also use code, and I will show you later how to use color code as well. Okay, but perhaps we can use something like this green just to give it a try, and then the actual font color will be perhaps white. Okay, and then let's also include some border. Okay, so the border, let's try to make it bigger, 3px solid, and the color we can try something black. Okay, so just to show it, and I think this will do it. Now to test the class, we can go back to HTML, and then for the two keys here, we can basically change add class equal to key. Okay, and the same for letter B as well. So class equal to B to key, and then we can refresh the page. You see that the two letters have been increased. We did not include any dimensional properties, so let's also include the width. Okay, for now let's try maybe 50 pixels, height also 50, and we can refresh it. Okay, so you see that AB has been changed to a different color, different size. How about C? How can we do that? C is created, as you remember, in JavaScript. So let's go to the JS file, index.js, and we can actually do the same thing. It's just a different way to create a code, because remember this my underscore div is the one that we used, the variable that stores the element for C. So what we can do here is to change the class name to key, and that should be it. Okay, this my underscore div class name equal to key is equivalent to adding class equal to key in the HTML. Okay, and so if you do that, letter C will also become different, just like A and B. Okay, so this is just a brief kind of exercise on JavaScript for the Wordle game, and we'll continue this further in the next video. So we'll see you there. Bye for now.